everybody, good morning. This is Jean here from Truelove Quilts for You. You must excuse me this summer. I've not been really making a lot of videos. We've had such an incredibly busy summer. If you've been following, you know my son got married. Our Maxwell, he graduated from high school. Maxwell will be doing another additional 3 years of schooling. Obviously not college, but because of his challenges, he's going another 3 years. But with other courses involved, and maybe like a co-op work program, and we're excited about that. Over the summertime, he's been working now and again with all our sons and my husband, who have plenty of work for him to do. He's such an incredibly hard worker. But we had gone to our grandson, Alex had graduated and had a nice big graduation party, so we wanted to do something special for Maxwell. I might throw up a few photographs of what we did for Maxwell at the end of this video. We went to a place called Speed Raceway. It was a go-karting place. He can get a little bit overwhelmed, and we made it a total surprise, and he was overwhelmed. At the very beginning, he had to have a moment because he was so excited. So many of his friends came. That was really nice. We have a pool, so we've had many swimming parties. So I've been busy. Anyway, why I'm here, I have had a bit of time to sew. I did finish my bookcase quilt. Now I had been doing a tutorial, if you were following along, my bookcase quilt. And I'm done. I put the hanging sleeve on the back of it. I hand sewed the hanging sleeve to the back. I explained that in the rest of this video. But here is my bookcase quilt. So what do you think? I'll be putting close-ups of my quilts. But I just wanted to show you here in my front room, if you can see that, all my goodies that I have. This was fun to make. This was I actually have a Facebook page, and somebody said, "Oh my word, that looks," and I put it up on my Facebook page, on my Truelove Quilts for You Facebook page. And quite a few people are like, "Oh, that looks so hard." I'm like, it's not really. It's not really hard. It looks like, oh my word. All I did was cut out a bunch of pretty things that the fabric manufacturers have made, and glued and stitched, as I've said to you before. Not really a challenge as much as fun. Now, again, as I've said, you need to know free motion quilting. If you've been following the tutorial, which is basically just making the black shelves and the wood surround whatever fabrics you have, you do have to, and after you've cut and glued down your images, if you were going to stitch around each image, as I have, you do have to know free motion quilting. But perhaps this would be a very good teaching project for you beginners to learn free motion quilting, believe it or not. Now, as I was saying, I've collected all these images over the years. I've been saying this until I'm blue in the face. Please excuse me. But if you just want to go on Pinterest and look up bookcase quilts or bookshelf quilts, you will see that like some of the books are just pieces of fabric that you can make look like books. Or as I was saying in my tutorial for this, instead of a vase that's printed, you can make yourself a vase. All sorts of different images. You can get some gray fabric and cut out the outline of a cat. You can get some maybe gold fabric and cut out candlesticks. You get the idea. But there's plenty of ideas on Pinterest. Now, again, if you've been following me, you will have seen that I used the quilt back that I found. I used a vintage quilt. I found it at a yard sale for $2, and I made it for the back of my quilt. It was a quilt top. And a couple of people have said, "Oh, that would have made a beautiful quilt." It was a beautiful quilt. And as I said before, I didn't love it. I don't love the quilt back. I love it on my quilt. I love the look of it. But to me, it wasn't my colorways. It was slightly dull for my tastes. It doesn't have a lot of sparkle to it. It's vintage, which I love, but I still don't love it. But as I said before in my last tutorial, I love the fact that I used it. And therefore I love it. So this is a compilation of my front quilt and some anonymous lady's back quilt piece. And you can really see the free motion quilting on the back of this quilt, where I did all my stitching down. Because as you know, the quilting actually came about. The actual quilting of the quilt came about the last step when I sewed all of the images down. If you've been following, again, I constructed the shelves, I cut the images, I glued the images, then I carefully sandwiched the backing and the batting together, and then I took the whole lot over to my machine and I stitched down my images, creating my quilting stitches. So there was no piecing of my of the top except for the black and wood shelves. That was it. And that's just basically strips of fabric and then a bit of on the top molding. Again, episode 99 if you've been following along. General measurements of a tutorial as such, but your shelves are your own size, your shelves are your own fabrics. So there you go. There's my bookcase quilt. I've had fun making it. I hope that I've inspired some of you to think outside the box, think outside the piecing box, and do something fun, something novelty. Okay, folks, busy day today, doing lots of chores, and I think other people, it's like 97 degrees out. It is hot. It is hot. I don't usually go swimming. You get wet. I don't know. I know you get wet, but do you know what I mean? Like, I have stuff to do. I don't feel like getting wet. But even I went in the pool. Even I went in the pool. But all the grandkids come and go swimming. It's really nice. So have a lovely day, everybody. Hope you love my quilt. And I'm just going to show you now how I've actually attached my hanging sleeve on the back top. It's a little bit different how I used it. I used the actual leftover bit of the quilt backing. You'll see what I did. Okay, have a lovely day, everybody. Thanks again. Bye. I finished all of the quilting on my quilt, all the free motion quilting and the straight quilting. Some of these I have chosen to blanket stitch around, and others I've just raw edge appliqued it on. Now, and also what I've done is I have stitched all the way around the edge, about 1/4 inch from the edge, and I've trimmed off all my batting. Now before I attach my hanging sleeve, which is the next thing I'm going to do, what I do, especially when you're working with a dark fabric, you can either use a let me get one, a lint roller. You can use a lint roller, or to get all of the fuzzies off. Now I do this with most of my quilts. Let me just get this lint roller going here. What you can do is, especially with black fabric, I've been dealing a lot with the I've trimmed it off, but you have the excess batting. Now sometimes I would have used a black batting. This time I didn't have a black batting, so I just used my warm and natural, my warm and plush batting, my 100% cotton cream color batting. And you'll find after you're messing about with your quilting, you'll find that those fibers of your black of your batting really do dull down your fabric, especially if you're dealing with black fabric. Now, you can use a lint roller, but what I actually like to do, I get packing tape, and I can see a lot better. What I do is I just get a thing of packing tape and I just go over my entire quilt top as such, and it picks up any little bits of thread and dust, and as I say, the little fibers of the batting. And I find this easier and a lot, perhaps even more cheaper to use than sheets and sheets of lint roll. The exact same concept though. I just go along and I will just press and press and press, and you can see the black coming more alive. Now also what I've noticed on here as I've been working, I have a little bit of leftover glue that must have just gotten, you know, shifted or so. I'll just go back with a little bit of water and I'll get that little tiny bit of glue, because as I said, it's Elmer's glue stick and it comes right off. There's just a little bit of white residue. So what I will do, and I don't know if you can see that now, that tape is full of little cotton fibers. And I can see when I'm doing it that with either my lint roller or my tape, that my black especially is coming more alive. I've manipulated this in my machine and in my machine over and over now for many, many hours. And now I want to clean it all up. I want to get these little fuzzies gone. I'll do this over the entire quilt top and really make this nice and pristine. And I'll do it, I've done it a couple of times, and I will continue doing it. Oops, something just dropped. Until my quilt is ready to hang up. I don't think I think it just gets it so lovely and nice and fresh again because you've messed about with it. But I tend to use, that piece is done, so then I'll just get another piece, just about 16 inches long or so, and just go over it, and you'll be amazed at how much better your fabric will look. That's just a little hint. Lint roller or tape. Now I'm going to show you how I'm going to actually do my hanging sleeve on the top back of my quilt. I'm at the stage where I can attach my top hanging sleeve. This is the top back of my quilt. This is the top of my quilt, front. And so I turn it around, and on my table I find the top back edge. Everything has been trimmed off really nice. Now if you've been following, you saw that I had trimmed off from my backing, my old quilt top that I pre-purposed. I trimmed off a piece of a little bit shredded edging of that quilt top. This was the edge, and some of this fabric, just it had a few holes in it. Well, I was going to use, and I had cut out a new piece of fabric for my hanging sleeve. And I was going to use this sort of gray and white polka dot for my hanging sleeve. But, which is nice, you can actually, let me pull this back, you can actually use a muslin if you would want, any fabric would do. But I cut that. But I got thinking, I was looking over at my scraps, and I thought, well, I have this piece of beautiful backing, the beautiful quilt top that I cut off. Why don't I use that as a hanging sleeve? However, I thought, well, since there's going to be a bit of not stress, but a little bit of weight on this top edge, I thought the vintage fabric, however old it is, might not be the ideal to use. But I really wanted to use as much as I can. So what I did Follow along with me here, because I'm going to give you the measurements for a hanging sleeve, but also what I did to actually use this for this specific project. I salvaged from my pieces that I had cut off a fairly decent piece that's on the back top edge. Okay, now I cut a piece of my sleeve, whatever fabric you use. I cut it about 7.5 to 8 inches wide by the width of the top of your quilt, plus about 2 inches, 2.5 inches or so. So here is my hanging sleeve, about 2 inches, about an inch or so larger than my quilt top edge. Now for this piece, I'm using this piece. I've cut that 7.5, 8 inches, and I then, when you're making a hanging sleeve, I then just fold it in half. I fold the whole thing in half, and I iron it real well. Now, since this piece is the vintage fabric, I thought, it might not be strong enough. It might not be strong enough. So what I did is I got this iron-on lightweight fusible interfacing. It's knobbly on one side, smooth on the other. And I just ironed that on the top half, or one of the half. I just cut a hunk of interface, and I ironed that on the top edge. Now, if you do remember I had that shredded hole on my quilt top that I couldn't use. I went and I put a piece of fabric in there, and I mended it just with the fusible webbing. I put a nice edge, I put a piece of white fabric and some fusible web on the outside. You're not going to be seeing this. This is the inside of my hanging sleeve. And then the outside of my hanging sleeve, the fabric has been strengthened and has been stabilized with this fusible web. Now, a hanging sleeve, this is all I've done. This makes it very easy to do. Now, I'll line up my hanging sleeve, which has been folded in half, with the fold. Now, you remember, this is the top of my quilt here. I'm doing this sort of upside down, but I'm going to put the edges together, which I've trimmed up real nice. That's hanging over about an inch on that end, and hanging over about an inch on this end. And what I do is I'm just going to turn this end. This is a raw end. I'm just going to turn that in maybe about 1 3/4 inches, 2 inches or so, perhaps 2 inches. Just going to turn that in. It doesn't go right to the very edge, if you can see that. The reason I do this is now I'm going to take this over to my machine, and I'm just going to stitch this down. I'm going to stitch that right together. That edge, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now, then you have a piece that's nice and solid and secure on one end, on each end. As you know, I curve my corners. I'm going to do the same thing, just a very shallow curve. Very, very shallow. And this way, when I put my binding on, which is the next step. Well, the next step is sewing this on. But when I put my binding on, I'm just going to enclose. I'm just going to come over and stitch to the back and turn to the front. I don't want to catch this edge. I just don't want to catch that edge. So by the time I do that, you're only going to have about 1/2 inch extra of your fabric. And that'll be fine for your hanging sleeve, for whatever size pole that you're going to be putting in there. So I'm going to now go over and I'm going to stitch this edge together. And then the next step, coming down about 1 inch from the edge, on the top edge, I'll pin this double-faced hanging sleeve onto the top edge of my quilt. And I'll stitch that right along there. And you know something? I do it twice. I'm going to stitch that 1/4 inch right along the top. Then I'm going to finish binding my quilt. And it's just going to be enclosing this hanging sleeve, right? I'll show you that. The only thing that I hate doing, but I'll do it anyway, is I'll finish binding my quilt, and then the very end I will hand stitch carefully this folded edge, not catching it through, obviously not catching it through to my fabric, just do a nice sturdy, very close hand stitch on the backing of my quilt. And then the hanging pole, whatever pole you have, whatever width, I like to do it this size because you can get a round pole in there fairly easy. You can get a thinner pole, however you choose to hang your quilt. I find an 8-inch wide strip folded in half makes a nice sturdy hanging sleeve. The pole is going to be between the back of the quilt and your hanging sleeve. It doesn't go inside. That's the way I do it. Maybe some people put it inside the hanging sleeve. I don't. I think there's 2 layers here, there's 3 layers here. So let's just even it out. And it's been really nicely secured to the top and then to the back of your quilt. And whatever it is that can hang, the rod hangs really nice, and or a flat molding or something to hang it slots right in there, in between the hanging sleeve and the back of the quilt. That's how I do it. So I'm going to just machine it. I'm just going to machine close this edge. I'm going to sew it to the top of my quilt, and then I'll bind my quilt, which you've seen other binding tutorials. I'm just going to finish binding my quilt, and then I'll finish hand sewing, and then my quilt will be done. But I like the fact that I utilized my extra bit of quilt. Even though this bit's a little bit messed up here, this was a hole, and you're never going to see that. I like the fact that I've done that. I've used most of my quilt now. I only have a little bit left over. So that's my hanging sleeve. Width of the fabric, 8 inches or so, folded in half. You don't have to reinforce it if you have lovely fresh fabric. Stitch the edges together. Now, if by all means you're going to have a squared corner, awesome. Basically the same thing. You just don't want to you're just not wanting to catch this hanging sleeve. But it's real sturdy now. I'm going to do this twice. I'll probably do my binding twice too, because there's a lot of weight on this upper seam here. And you know me, reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. So that's what I'm going to do. So there is my hanging sleeve. Okay folks, so here I am, finished my quilt, and right now I am stitching, hand stitching, needle and thread. Oh, can't stand it. Those of you who like to hand sew, my word, I don't know. I'm hand sewing my hanging sleeve to the back of my quilt. I'm watching House Hunters International. But to the top back, what I've done is I've attached my hanging sleeve, as you saw, and then I attached my binding. And I really did, because there's quite a lot of fabric here. There's like 8 layers of fabric. I really stitched it well. I really machine stitched it. Here's my hanging sleeve. I always say hanging frame. Isn't that funny? My hanging sleeve. And I'm using a double thread to stitch it down. Not real tight. You don't ever want to get a pull on it. You want it to hang really nice. I finished my binding of my quilt. Again, I curved my edges here, but my actual little legs of my quilt, I did a straight stitch. I mitered it. And there's the backing. I'll show you it in all of its glory. But that's my quilt. Yeah, it's pretty. I like it. My bookcase quilt. Just have to finish sewing this on, and I'll be done. So, yeah, I'm really, really pleased with it. But I hate to hand sew. Oh yeah, look, yeah, he has a $700,000 budget. She has a $900,000. Where do they find these people? $900,000 budget, and they were looking for he wanted a ranch Seriously, she wanted a French, I've said this before, she wanted a French provincial, and it's house number 3. They're going to get a colonial for like $910,000. Go figure. Where do they find these people, right? So anyway, I'm sewing this on. I'm really thrilled. My quilt will be done, and yeah. So there you go. My bookcase quilt is done, ready to hang up. My hanging sleeve. Thanks a lot, folks, for following along this journey with me. And I hope you can find your bits and cut it out. And even if it takes you a long time, it's a fun project. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for following me. Okay, back to this ridiculous, stupid job.